The relevant organisations, that 600 million.
Sorry?
Direct to the relevant organisations, excuse me.
It could be.
It could be, yeah. Some of those decisions will be made through the budget process.
Okay.
About the Commonwealth's allocation of our share.
Yep.
And then 1.4 of our funding will go to the states who will build the services and co-fund them to essentially rebuild services that have been lost since the NDIS came in.
And the states will contribute $2 billion on a population basis, presumably as well.
Yes, that's correct.
The $2 billion Commonwealth commitment, does that come from savings to the NDIS from the new target lower growth rate?
We've made provision for Thriving Kids, so no, it's unrelated to that. Because this, if you remember, I think we've been trying for some time to work with the states on Thriving Kids.
Yes, understand.
Yeah. And so we've made a provision to get those services going. We have it, like, it's going to be progressed better now that we've got agreement from National Cabinet.
Before we continue, do us a little favour by subscribing to the channel, because over 98% of you watching haven't. Subscribed, it costs you nothing, not even a penny to join this channel. Have you subscribed? Thanks so much.
But it's not linked to any decisions that haven't, or that might be taken in the future about how we moderate the growth in the NDIS.
Sure, but the Minister for Health in the NDIS has publicly announced a growth target for the NDIS, which is lower than it was previously. That will save much more than $2 billion over the forward estimates if it's successful, I assume.
Yes, but you asked me whether Thriving Kids was part of that.
Yeah.
It's not. We've made a provision for that. We haven't taken reflected in any of the budget numbers further moderation behind the initial one to get it to 8%. There's, and we needed the states and territories on board for some of that as well, which is why National Cabinet will allow that, where they have agreed to try and work towards that target.
What is the expected save from the lower target NDIS growth over the forwards?
I think it's hard. It depends. It depends on when those decisions are taken.
When which decisions are taken?
And reflected in a budget. Like, we haven't done that. Minister Butler has said, look, this is what I think needs to happen.
Yeah.
States and territories have agreed that that's a desirable outcome. But in terms of translating that into a budget decision and costing that has not been done.
So you haven't costed the lower growth rate in the NDIS yet that he's committed the government to? No? Will that be costed?
No. It was the original work that was done was around moderating growth to 8%.
Yep.
And that's been reflected in the budget.
Right. So that's what I'm asking a question about. What is the save from getting NDIS growth down to 8% over the forwards?
I haven't got a final number on that. I don't have a number that I can give you.
Surely the officials, someone will know that.
We can have a look and otherwise take it on notice and find out what we can give you as the delta.
This is a pretty important budget item. Very expensive program.
It is.
So,
But it's also subject to further discussion, through the budget process. And so...
I'm not asking you to give me unannounced things. I'm just asking what you've announced already.
We haven't announced a costing. Minister Butler has said growing at 8% is not sustainable. And he's said that a more realistic... I can't remember the words in the speech at the press club, but it was working towards a 5 to 6%.
Yeah, I'm not holding you to that. Yeah. Because I understand that work hasn't happened.
It would depend on how... it would depend... There would be a number of things that would depend upon. And so we're not in a position to give you a number on that today.
But I understood from Mr Yiannopoulos' answer that the government's policy of bringing the growth rate from well above 8% down to 8% has already happened and is already reflected in the budget. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
It's not the additional save of bringing it down to 5 or 6%, right?
That's right.
So just tell me what the save is to get it down to 8%.
That would have been
I'd have to take it on notice.
Yeah.
It was published. It wasn't published in MAFO.
It was
earlier, and we'd have to take it on notice to work out what that number looks like.
Yeah, 23, 24 budget, I think.
Often there are people in the room who have this within their own knowledge and come forward and let you know. I notice there's not actually a lot of finance officials in the room
There's
today.
more in the room behind.
Yeah, well, if they've come up to Parliament House to assist you to give evidence, then if they know this number, they should really come and help. I think it is better to have them in the room
Well,
if they've...
Senator, I think
yeah,
we've got. I'm sorry, we've got the official here that is best placed to possibly be able to answer it, and we just don't have that number in front of us, and I don't want to sort of do a calculation on the fly.
What is the point of having a room full of people sitting there? They could be back at the department
Senator
doing
Paterson,
their jobs.
I mean, these decisions were taken a couple of years ago. You're asking for what was the budget impact essentially of, I think, a decision taken in the 23-24 budget, and how that fed in across the forward estimates. We don't have that number with us. We are happy to provide it to you.
Okay, if you could, that would be great. And obviously the decision to reduce the spend even further down to 5 or 6%, that will be reflected in the upcoming budget.
Well, if we are in a position to make those decisions, yes.
Yeah, okay,
Like,
right. If decisions haven't been taken, I accept that.
Fair dinkum. If there's one thing guaranteed to get Canberra talking, it's a budget hearing where politicians start asking where the numbers actually come from. And that's exactly what unfolded this week during a Senate estimates hearing, where attention turned to one of the biggest spending programs in the federal budget, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, better known as the NDIS. The exchange quickly became less about political slogans and more about something every taxpayer eventually asks. If the government announces a savings target, where are those savings expected to come from? The discussion began with questions about a separate initiative known as the Thriving Kids Programme, a joint package announced by the Commonwealth and the states to provide additional supports for children outside the NDIS. Opposition Senator James Paterson asked Finance Minister Katy Gallagher how the Commonwealth's contribution would be funded and whether it depended on savings expected from reforms to the NDIS. The initial answer was straightforward. Departmental official Natasha Cole explained that the Commonwealth's $2 billion contribution would be split into two parts. Around $4 billion would go to the states and territories to help deliver services for eligible children, while approximately $600 million would fund nationally delivered services, with some decisions still to be finalised through the budget process. Senator Paterson then asked the key question: was this funding being paid for through expected savings from slowing the growth of NDIS spending? Minister Gallagher's response was equally direct. No. She said the Thriving Kids funding had already been provided for separately and was not dependent on future NDIS savings. That answer, however, opened the door to a much broader discussion. Over recent years, governments of different political persuasions have acknowledged that the NDIS has been growing rapidly. While the scheme has transformed support for hundreds of thousands of Australians living with disability, successive governments have also said its long-term financial sustainability remains an important challenge. The current government's objective has been to moderate the annual growth rate of NDIS spending while maintaining support for participants. That brought Senator Paterson to his next question. If the government has publicly spoken about reducing the scheme's annual growth rate, how much money is expected to be saved? At first glance, it might sound like a simple question, but the answers highlighted just how complicated budget forecasting can become. Minister Gallagher explained that while the government had spoken publicly about longer-term aspirations for the growth rate, detailed budget decisions still depended on future policy work, consultation with the states and territories, and the normal budget process. She emphasised that simply announcing a target is different from implementing the detailed policy decisions needed to achieve it. Senator Paterson then narrowed the discussion. Rather than asking about future ambitions, he focused on reforms that had already been announced and reflected in previous budgets. If earlier reforms had already reduced projected spending growth to around 8%, what was the estimated saving from those measures? That was the point where the hearing became particularly detailed. Minister Gallagher acknowledged that she did not have the exact figure available during the hearing. Rather than speculate, she said the department would take the question on notice and provide the number later. From the opposition's perspective, that answer prompted another line of questioning. Given the size of the NDIS within the Commonwealth budget, Senator Paterson argued that understanding the financial impact of major reforms was important for parliamentary scrutiny. He questioned why such a figure was not immediately available during estimates. Minister Gallagher replied that officials preferred not to estimate figures from memory during public hearings and instead wanted to provide an accurate answer after checking the relevant budget documents. That exchange highlighted one of the practical realities of Senate estimates. While ministers are expected to answer questions about government policy, many highly detailed financial figures are provided later through formal written responses to ensure accuracy. The conversation then returned to the government's broader reform agenda. Senator Paterson referred to public comments made by the minister responsible for the NDIS about seeking an even lower long-term growth rate than previously forecast. He asked whether the government had already developed a detailed plan to achieve that objective. Minister Gallagher drew an important distinction. She said there was extensive work underway across government and in cooperation with state and territory governments, but many implementation decisions were still being developed. In other words, the government had established a policy direction, but individual reforms would continue to be considered through future budget processes before their financial impacts were formally incorporated into the budget. That difference became the central issue in the exchange. The opposition sought greater detail about projected savings and implementation. The government argued that substantial reform work was ongoing and that future decisions would be reflected in subsequent budget updates once finalised. For viewers unfamiliar with the budget process, it's worth noting why these hearings matter. Senate estimates is one of the main ways Parliament examines government spending. Ministers and senior public servants appear before committees to answer detailed questions about expenditure, policy implementation, and departmental administration. Some questions receive immediate answers. Others are formally taken on notice and answered in writing after officials have checked the relevant information. As the hearing continued, both sides agreed on one broader point. The NDIS is an essential programme supporting Australians living with disability. At the same time, its long-term financial sustainability remains a major budget issue, requiring ongoing reform and cooperation between the Commonwealth and the states. Where the debate differed was over the pace of reform, the level of detail currently available, and how quickly projected savings could be translated into concrete budget decisions. And it was at that point that the questioning moved from broad policy to the finer details of how those reforms might actually be delivered. As the exchange entered its final stages, Senator Paterson returned to what he saw as the central issue. If the government has publicly identified a lower long-term growth target for the NDIS, when will Australians see the detailed measures that explain exactly how that target will be achieved? Minister Gallagher responded that setting an overall direction is only one part of the process. She said reforms of a programme as large and complex as the NDIS require consultation, cooperation with the states and territories, and careful consideration of how any changes would affect participants and service delivery. Only after those decisions are made would their financial impact be reflected in a future budget or economic update. In other words, the government argued that significant work is still underway before all of the numbers can be finalised. That explanation did not fully satisfy the opposition, which maintained that Parliament should receive as much information as possible about the expected budget impact of major reforms. The exchange highlighted a broader challenge facing governments of any political persuasion. Large national programs often require years of policy development, negotiation and implementation. Budget forecasts can change as reforms are refined, economic conditions evolve, and agreements are reached with states and territories. For Australians watching from outside Canberra, the technical discussion ultimately comes back to two practical questions. Can the NDIS continue providing essential support to participants? And can it do so in a way that remains financially sustainable over the long term? Those questions have been at the centre of policy discussions for several years and are likely to remain a major focus of future budgets. As the committee moved on to its next line of questioning, one thing had become clear. Both government and opposition agreed that the NDIS is one of Australia's most significant public programs. Where they differed was over how quickly reforms should progress, how savings should be measured, and when detailed costings should be made public. That debate is unlikely to end with a single Senate hearing. Instead, it will continue through future budget updates, parliamentary scrutiny, and ongoing discussions between the Commonwealth, the states, and disability sector stakeholders. For Australians, the outcome matters not only because of the size of the program, but because of the people who rely on it every day. As further policy decisions are announced, Parliament will continue examining both the financial implications and the practical impact of those reforms. So, what do you think? How should governments balance long-term budget sustainability with maintaining strong support for Australians who rely on the NDIS, and how much detail should be released before major reforms are fully implemented? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, keep the discussion respectful. If you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future coverage of Australian politics and public policy. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.